Hey everybody, I'm Jack Reedy with Future Pastimes, and I like to design custom expansions for the games that I play and enjoy. And this is the custom expansion I made for Pandemic, first edition. And it is called Pandemic Morbidity. This is what the Morbidity deck itself looks like. And all the cards in this expansion have the little Morbidity icon, because why not? The expansion itself comes with several modules. It comes with missions, specialists, wild actions, escalations, and the Morbidity challenge itself. And the Morbidity challenge requires you to use the wild actions and the specialists. So I'll explain all the different modules first, and then I'll talk about that challenge. So first off, we have the deck of mission cards. So here's the deck. It's separate, and you can actually use this deck with any edition of Pandemic since it doesn't integrate with any of the other cards. This is what the mission cards look like. So you are dealt out 2 mission cards at the start of the game, and you're going to choose one to keep, one you're going to discard. And you're going to have that. You keep it secret, but it gives you something unique that you are trying to accomplish at some point of the game. There's no penalty if you don't, but there's a reward if you do. So let me go over a couple of these. So this one says, build a research station in any blue city. So that's pretty straightforward. The reward is you may cure 1 disease at that research station with 1 fewer cards. So that's pretty handy to have. It does not count as part of your hand. None of these mission cards do, so you just hold on to them until you accomplish them. This is another one. It says, spend 2 consecutive turns in Atlanta without leaving the city. You may treat any disease cubes there. So people are like, why aren't you doing anything? You're like, well, I've got my reasons. Because if you do that, your reward is that you get to draw an additional roll. And at the start of your turns, you will choose one of these rolls to use for that turn. So that's pretty handy to have. It might be worth spending 2 turns in Atlanta, especially since you're probably going to start the game there, although not necessarily. But, you know, if you've drawn these at the beginning of the game, you can be like, we're starting in Atlanta. This mission is travel to a research station in a red city and treat at least 1 disease cube there. So that's going to require a research station being built in a red city. But the reward is you draw a card from the player deck for each disease cube you treated. Remove all disease cubes from any city cards you draw. You may give cards drawn to any players. You must activate any epidemics that you draw. So a little bit risky, but also huge potential benefits there. So that's what the mission cards do. They give you, there's quite a variety of different effects and things for you to be doing. And I think it helps add some thematics to the game. Everyone's kind of got competing requirements. You have the different bureaucracies that the roles and the characters would have to deal with, competing agendas and what have you. So somebody going off and trying to complete their mission could screw things up, but again, they've weighed the risks and decided it was worth doing. Let's look next at the wild action. So there are 4 of these that are added to the player deck. And when you draw one, it goes into your hand, it counts as part of your hand, it gives you an option. So you can either give yourself an additional action on the turn that you play it, so you just played that for free, and you've got an additional action that turn, or you can use this card as the 5th card of any basic color for finding a cure. So it lets you do that. They're all the same. So it's one of the few modules that you can add into from my various expansions and the official expansions that can make the game a little bit easier. But I like to add in multiple things and try to find a balancing point where here's a few things that are going to make things easier. Here's a few things that are going to make things harder. On that harder side, we have the escalation card. So there are 4 of these as well. And this is going to be another decision point for you to deal with. And this is going to be one where you are going to be using the Morbidity challenge. So if you've drawn this one, for instance, you're going to shuffle all Black City cards in the infection discard pile and place them on top of the infection draw deck. Otherwise, you're going to add this card to the Morbidity discard, and you will see why these are 2 bad choices, and you'll have to make one of them and decide which one is less worse. So, because obviously what happens here is when you do that, when you have, at the end of the turn, when you are playing the infector, you're going to be reinfecting all of these cities again. So, and of course, one for each of the different diseases. Now let's look at the specialist. So this is something you're going to deal a number of these cards into the player deck. I usually go with the number of players, but it's one of those things, there's more than the players you're going to have. So you can decide how many you want to put in there. This is something that potentially can make the game a little bit easier. And the way it works is each one of these is actually a fictitious character from a movie or TV show that you could easily imagine being deployed to deal with a pandemic. And if you've got one of these, it counts as part of your hand. It's in your hand until you decide to use it at the start of your turn. And when you do, you are going to be that specialist for the turn instead of your normal role. So if you're the researcher or the operations expert, you set that aside. You don't use any of the special abilities of that role. You just use what the specialist. But you get to decide when you're going to do that. And then after it's done, you're going to discard it to the Morbidity discard card, which again, I'll get into more in just a minute. So let's take a look at the different characters that we've got in here. So we've got Lieutenant Colonel Robert Neville. That's from I Am Legend. So if you've got him, you may find a cure in any city with 3 disease cubes, even if there's no research station there. So that's huge. You're just looking for somewhere that's getting ready to outbreak, and you can cure that disease. Here we have Major Scarlett Ross. She is from 28 Weeks Later. If you are at a research station, you may spend actions to give city cards to any players in the cities of the cards you are sharing. And again, once you've got this card, you can plan ahead. You can say, all right, let's figure out where people are, get to those cities that match the cards, and then I'll decide to activate Major Ross. House. If you are in a city with a research station, you may use that city card as any color for finding a cure. So that can be handy as well. Colonel Sam Daniels from Outbreak. Use the role of any player that is in the same city you are when you start your turn. So a little bit of a twist on using the different abilities. Dr. Sai Choi, he's from the mini-series of Andromeda Strain. Discard a city card of each color at a research station to move either the infection rate or the outbreak indicator back 1. So normally that is not something you can really do, but it's a handy little ability. Dr. Charles Ashford from Resident Evil 2. You may share knowledge freely with any player in a city with you, but add a disease cube of the matching color to the city of the card you share. So that's a little bit risky. Dr. Susan Tyler from Mimic. You may spend an action to turn disease cubes in a city of a matching card you hold into a different color. So that could be useful. And then Dr. Catherine Rayleigh from 12 Monkeys. You may place city cards on the top of the player deck if you are in the corresponding city. So that helps you to buy a little more time, a little kind of a time travel reference there. So those are the different modules. But like I said, a lot of them are designed to work in conjunction with the Morbidity deck. So for that, you're going to have this card off to one side. It's the Morbidity discard. And whenever the players have to discard an epidemic or a specialist or a wild action, they're actually going to place the card here. And if you have any combination of the 3 of those, epidemic, specialist, wild action, then you have to draw from the Morbidity deck. So using your wild actions, using your specialists, it's going to have some consequences. It's going to push you closer, sort of the advancing the doomsday clock of having to draw from the Morbidity deck, which, as you might imagine, is not good. But if 3 epidemics are discarded here, it does not result in drawing from the Morbidity deck. You clear the epidemics here and you start the Morbidity discard over again. So if you're dealing with a lot of epidemics and not using your wild actions and your specialists, you can avoid having to go there. So let's take a look at what's in there. It's a deck of cards, and most of them are pretty bad. But you're going to have actions that it requires the players or some combination of players to do. And then there's consequences, and how that works changes from one to the next. So this one is called Panic in the Streets, and the action is all players must immediately move their pawns to Atlanta. So if you don't have to, but if you don't, then the consequence is add 1 cube to each city adjacent to every city with a research station. So that could be a really horrible thing, but all players must agree to perform the action, or else the consequence is activated. So that's how that one works. This one's called Grassroots. And here the players may perform the action any number of times to activate the consequence. So this one's actually good. The action is discard 1 card of each city color. Well, good. But the consequence is you move the outbreak indicator back 1 space. So if you can afford to do that, it's a good way to buy yourself some time again. This one is until the action is performed, the consequence is activated each turn. So this one's called Time is Running Out. And the action is there may not be any cities with 3 disease cubes. So really the action is you've got to get rid of some disease cubes, because the consequence is each player draws 3 cards from the player deck after their turn and must discard 1, not counting epidemics. So that makes you burn through that player deck at a much faster rate. This one, again, also, the action is performed. Until the action is performed, the consequence is activated. So there must be a research station in at least 1 city of each color. And the consequence is remove a cube from the supply of each disease color that does not have a research station built in the city of the same color. So as you can see, this forces the players to do more things, some desperate actions, things that may interrupt their plans. And that's the reason why I really like this module, because it keeps the game really fresh. It makes it much more challenging, but there are other things that you can add to the game that can offset that a little bit. So I enjoy that challenge of adding in different modules and different elements to the various decks that will tweak the difficulty levels up and down, and just trying to see, all right, can we do that? Because the base game, it has this idea of you can mix in more epidemics, and I have even more epidemics these are ones that I made that can go into the deck. And so more epidemics does make the game much harder by itself, but there's some other things that you can throw in there to offset it, more events, and other modules from other expansions that I've made. So that's the Pandemic Morbidity expansion. Let me know what you think of that. The files were shared on Board Game Geek, and so if you've actually ever played it, let me know. I'd love to hear about that. And again, if you've created any custom expansions for your edition of Pandemic, be sure to let me know about that. As I've mentioned before, I still have all of my first edition stuff, and that's what I still play. Eventually, I'll pick up the latest edition, and I'll have to redo all the cards. But when I do, I'll share those cards with everybody. And but yeah, I'm in no rush to do that, so don't hold your breath. That's it for this video. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you again soon.